One more question.
Yes, please. Of course.
One of the issues on your agenda stands the provocations from the center of Belarus, the sign of giving war, drones, balloons with cigarettes. What is your position on these provocations and who stands behind it?
Look, I have no clear knowledge about what has been going on. I heard the complaints from our Baltic friends. What I can tell you, principally speaking, is that violating the airspace of a sovereign country is unacceptable. But I don't know details about these issues. Thank you. Bye.
How's everyone? Good. Well, look, really delighted to be here this morning. Delighted to attend my very first Foreign Affairs Council meeting and look forward to working with my European colleagues on many different issues. Of course, we have a busy agenda this morning. First up is our discussion on Ukraine. I think this is a critical juncture, not just for Ukraine, but for security across Europe. What Europe has always advocated for is a long-lasting, sustainable peace, and it is absolutely essential that that is where we get to. I think the actions of Russia most recently, their attacks on the civilian population, on critical infrastructure, but also on our friends and colleagues in Poland, show a country that is focused on continuing its aggression, not on peace. So it's really important that Europe remains united, that any peace agreement or ceasefire has the support of Ukraine and importantly of EU, and of course we'll hear from our Foreign Minister from Ukraine today as well, which is really important. On the Middle East, it's very welcome that we have a ceasefire, albeit a very, very fragile ceasefire. It's very welcome that humanitarian aid has continued to flow into the Middle East. However, it's very clear that we need significantly increased numbers of humanitarian aid. There are tens of thousands of young people, children, civilians that are still at risk of starvation, and so there's much more that we need to do. We need to continue to focus on what is happening in the West Bank as well, and I think it's extremely worrying that there continues to be breaches of international law in that regard. So that will be an important discussion today. We'll also discuss the ongoing situation in Sudan. Really pleased that it is formally on the agenda. Ireland had sought that this would be formally on the agenda. This is the largest humanitarian crisis anywhere in the world at the moment, not just in terms of the tens of thousands of people who are at risk of starvation, if not millions, but also the significant loss of life, the use of rape as a weapon of war. We need to do everything that we can to end this and to make sure that humanitarian aid continues to flow in. This evening I'm really pleased as well that I'll meet with the Palestinian donor group. It is important, and Ireland has been clear that we support the Palestinian Authority, so this is an opportunity to meet with the authority and to make sure that we are working towards a two-state solution in providing financial support as well as other assistance to Palestine and what is ongoing humanitarian catastrophe at the moment.
Minister, just on Gaza, Israel withholding monies owed and taxes owed to the Palestinian Authority. Gaza has been effectively levelled. Does Israel need to financially contribute to the reconstruction of Gaza, and do you feel EU pressure needs to be put on Israel to bring that about?
Well, firstly, I don't think it's acceptable that any funds would be withheld, and I think it's important that that is called out. I think any monies that are owed to the Palestinian Authority, tax monies, that they are paid. It's very clear that there will be significant financial support that is needed to rebuild Gaza, and that financial support will need to be sustained over a long period of time. Ireland is absolutely committed to that and has been committed to providing whatever financial support that we can, and that will continue. And I think those conversations need to be had with Israel as well as with other member states across the EU and beyond as well.
Minister, on Ukraine, are you alarmed at some of the reports on the Russian and US peace plan, which seems to once again call for huge swathes of eastern Ukraine to be handed over to Russia, for the Ukrainian armed forces to be cut by 60%? This seems to be cooked up between the United States and Russian officials. Are you concerned that Europe will once again be sidelined as such a tentative peace plan emerges?
Well, look, the first thing I would say is, and we all know the phrase, nothing about us without us, so any ceasefire, any agreement must have the support and the agreement of Ukraine, and it must be supported by the EU as well. And I think any suggestion that an agreement to the contrary would be acceptable by any of us, it won't be. So I think it's really important that any agreement that is reached, that there is full support from Ukraine but also from the EU. Again, I would repeat, the actions of Russia in recent days do not show a country that wants a lasting peace, and so Europe must be absolutely firm in its solidarity and its support for Ukraine. Ireland has always stood resolutely with Ukraine, and that certainly won't change. But again, I think it's important to hear from our Ukrainian colleagues here today, in light of commentary that we've heard just in the last 24 hours, and make sure that we have a very clear picture of what their view is and exactly where we go from here.
Minister, about the situation in Gaza, Minister. Yes, about the situation in Gaza, with what the EU is planning, and you are discussing today, training the police and also the mission in Rafah. Do you see with this kind of guarantees that this peace plan will work, or is just another big smoke waiting for calming down and repeating this circle of escalation and violence again?
I think it's really important that a key part of our discussion today is about how Europe can help, how we can do more to ensure that the ceasefire lasts. It is an extremely fragile ceasefire, and I think we can all see that from recent events, but we need to do everything that we can. There is still a significant risk of tens of thousands, if not more, of people starving, so we need to ensure that our humanitarian aid that is finally flowing in, that can increase, and that we are working towards a long-lasting peaceful solution, that we are working towards that two-state solution. And so I think the UN Council resolution, the first that we've had on Gaza in a long time, the fact that it referenced a pathway towards a two-state solution and a peaceful resolution is extremely welcome. So you have absolute commitment on Ireland's behalf in making sure that everything that can be done to support this ceasefire, that it will happen, but that our principles and our values underpin everything that we do. I think also in terms of the most recent agreement, we need to see more detail. We need to see how the Palestinian Authority will be part of that overall agreement, the board itself, who sits on us, what the overall objectives are. But we look forward to working with colleagues in the time ahead and making sure that that can be that can absolutely underpin what is an important ceasefire at the moment.
Minister, on the association agreement and the suspension of the trade preferences between the EU and Israel, is that now effectively dead? Or is Ireland pushing for that still to be suspended and support for that to be suspended?
Look, that's very much on the table, and I think that's where it needs to remain. I think the fact that we have seen progress in recent weeks and months is very welcome. I welcome the ceasefire. I think the fact that we are seeing aid flowing is extremely welcome, but also that hostages have been released, that remains have been returned to families. I think this is really important. But given what we've seen over the last number of years, I think we need to keep this on the table. I think we need to keep it as part of our overall discussions and engagement. But our focus today is very much on how can Europe help, how can we support the ceasefire that's there, how can we work towards that long-lasting peaceful solution.
Minister, just on the Occupied Territories Bill, is there a risk that American companies that are having to do due diligence on this may fall foul of a Trump administration directive whereby they can't do anything that appears to be some kind of link to a boycott of Israel?
Look, we've first of all been very clear as a government that we will progress the Occupied Territories Bill. We've always been clear, though, that it's complex and that it is not straightforward. We've given a commitment in relation to goods in terms of services. This is something that we are exploring further and working with the Attorney General on. Of course, other member states have made changes, but we've seen a changing dynamic. We obviously now have a ceasefire as well. That needs to be our focus and priority, but we are still, and I am still, committed to progressing this piece of legislation, working closely with our colleagues, not just across Europe, but in the US as well. And I think we need to be cognizant of maybe what is going on around us here, but certainly I'm committed to making sure we make progress on this and making sure that we play our part within Europe in supporting a long-lasting peace.
Is there a position that services could be included, your kind of personal opinion?
Again, I think it's extremely complex. It's not down to my personal opinion here. This is about what's possible, what's not, what's workable here and what's not, and that's where the advice of the Attorney General and obviously our engagement with our legal team as well will be extremely important. So that's what I'm looking at the moment, or awaiting at the moment, and obviously we'll engage with colleagues right across government, because I think there's been significant common ground here when it comes to this. Not least that, I mean, I do have to reiterate and stress Ireland has been to the fore in terms of supporting Palestine, whether it's recognising the Palestinian state, whether it's the significant aid we've provided in recent months and years, whether it's the fact that we are a party to the South African case. We will and continue to support Palestine. Thank you.
That is insane. That is
I'm making three short comments. First of all, we are 41 days away from Cyprus assuming the presidency of the Council of the European Union. The preparations are intensifying, and in that context, I yesterday had the opportunity to co-chair the EU-Tajikistan Association Council on behalf of the High Rep. Central Asia remains an area of great priority for the European Union. Secondly, I just returned from a trip to Washington, D.C., where I've met with Secretary Rubio. My conclusion as regards the EU-US relation is that we need more dialogue, there is space for more dialogue, and there is no other way of making sure that the transatlantic relation remains strong. Third, on Sudan, the situation is unacceptable for a very long time. We need to make sure that humanitarian aid scales in, and also that there is no weaponization of humanitarian aid. There needs also to be accountability for the atrocities that are taking place. In that regard, we need to make sure that we make clever use of the toolbox of the European Union. Both sides are illegitimate and cannot be part of the next day in Sudan. And finally, we need to make sure that we fully support the efforts by the Quad on the basis of the 4 pillars. Thank you very much.